Hey, hi, my name's Joe Walter, and we're in a pandemic, and we're also at Folklife, and it's scary story night, and I have one. It's a story of a samurai who lived long ago, and his master had fallen on hard times. This was the Lord of Kyoto, and when the master was reduced to poverty, well, then so was the samurai, along with his good wife. His good wife was kind, beautiful, with long, luxurious hair, blue-black as the night, shining as the stars and soft as a cloud. The samurai would spend his days in his cups, in his sake cups, and his good wife did what she could to keep food on the table, selling at the market whatever she had of value, jeweled hair ornaments and silken kimonos, and he hardly noticed what she was sacrificing for him. One day, he looked at himself and he saw his kimono tattered and worn. And he starts complaining that, isn't it enough that I'm living like a pauper and now I have to look like one? I have to lose all face by walking around in a kimono like this. I need a new one. And she heard him. The next morning, when he woke up, well, more like noon, he heard a sound, suka, suka, suka. And he followed the sound into the little room at the back of the house where his wife used to work. He slid open the screen and he saw her, the back of her head, her hair was cut short. And she was weaving cloth from her own hair in order to make him a new kimono. She worked for 2 days. She didn't eat, she didn't sleep, and he let her be. And finally, she came out and presented him with this new, beautiful kimono. And he said, "What is this? It has no crest." And she said, "We have no master, my love. We have no crest." And he just said, "Well, make me one. Make me a symbol of great power." So she took the kimono. She went back into her little room. And she didn't have any dye to paint one, and she didn't have any thread to embroider one. So she just bit her little finger until she drew blood. And then in the most exquisite hand, she made him a crest with the symbol of kokoro, which means heart. And she brought it back to him. And he asked, "What is this?" And she explained, "Well, you ask for a symbol of great power. And there's no power in the world greater than that of a good heart." He said. But he was secretly impressed, and he thought it made him look brave to wear a kimono that had a crest that was written in blood. And so he goes outside to strut around and show off his new kimono, and he walked into a procession that was coming down the street. There were 100 bannermen waving their purple silken flags and 150 samurai, all fully armored. And in the middle of all this, there's a beautiful white stallion, and on top of it is a fair maiden, long black hair, nearly as beautiful as his own good wife's had been. She smiled at him, and he looked at her, and she said, "How handsome you look in your new kimono." And he said, "Yes, I'm just taking a break from my official duties." And she said, "Oh, well, not just handsome, but official as well. My father could use a good man like you. He's the Lord of Nagoya. Come with us. Show him your worth." And he bowed to her, and he rushed back home, and he told his wife, quickly, draw me a bath. I have to look my best because I've got a new position. I'm going to go to work for the Lord of Nagoya. And she was heartbroken. Nagoya was hours away from Kyoto, where they lived. But she did it, and she helped prepare him. And as he was leaving, he looked at her and he said, I won't be back until your hair has grown out the way it was. You look like a boy. And he was off. In Nagoya, he was successful. He was hired on as a samurai, and he became very wealthy. And the maid of Nagoya convinced him to marry her. But he couldn't be married to two women. So he sent a message to his wife in Kyoto that he was divorcing her. She received that message on the 9th day of the 10th moon. But being wealthy doesn't necessarily make you happy. Life with his new wife was nothing like with his good wife. This new wife was only interested in hair ornaments, kimonos, rice cakes, and every night she would flash her sharp white teeth and tell him, come to bed, my little official. Show me your worth. He was not a happy husband. Time went on, and her temper began to show. She was quick to anger, quick to flash those sharp white teeth. And finally, she grew older. She wasn't the beauty that she once was, and she would cover her face with a thick white powder and red lips. And one night he woke up and he heard a sound that he had not heard for years and years. Suka, suka, suka. And suddenly, with the force of a tsunami, he was overcome with this yearning for his good wife that he had not seen in 20 years. He remembered that kimono that she'd made from her own hair. And he went looking for it. He went to a closet that had long forgotten things, and he pulled it out, and it was lovely as he remembered. He remembered what she had said, that the symbol, the crest that was on it, was the symbol of the most powerful force in the world, that of a good heart. And he decided on the spot that he would return to her. He went into the bedroom where his Nagoya wife was sleeping, woke her up and let her know on the spot he was divorcing her. And she woke up angry as could be and said, you married me for my money, and now that I'm ugly and fat, you're done with me. And she just told him. He told her, save your mouth for rice cakes. And he was gone. He went and he got a stallion wearing nothing but the beautiful black kimono. He went riding home to Kyoto. But the road was rough, and he wasn't a young man anymore, and the ride was hard. And he arrived in Kyoto in the wee hours of the morning, and he found the house. But it wasn't the way he remembered it. It wasn't the tidy, neat, modest home that he'd lived in. It was now covered with weeds and trash on the lawn, and the windows were broken. And he went up on the porch and knocked on the door, and there was no answer. And he slid the door open and he looked inside, and you could see through the tears in the walls. The moonlight was shining through, and the floors they were full of holes and no mats on them. But he just was going to look through all the rooms, and finally he gets to the back of the house, and he saw a glow in one room, and it was the room where his wife had always liked to work. And he slid the door open, and there she was. She looked unchanged after 20 years. She smiled at him and said, "Oh, my love, I'm so glad for a chance to have you with me again, even if only for a moment." And he looked at her and said, "For a moment, for an eternity. I'm a wealthy man now. Tomorrow I'll send for my servants and we'll have money. You'll never suffer again." And they went to each other and embraced. And over the time of 20 years, it was as though no time had passed at all. And through that night, they were once again united as one. And in the morning, he woke up and he looked and he saw the light shining through onto the floor, which was no longer the soft, comfortable bed that he thought he fell asleep in, but a moldy, rotten floorboards broken. And he turned and thought, was this a dream? What's happening? But there she was. There was her long, dark hair, and he put his hands on her, and he reached over to kiss her cheek. And then, oh! The sleeper had no face. He was holding a corpse. The face was nothing but bones crawling with insects, and her hair dark and tangled, and he got tangled in the hair, seeming to wrap itself around him. And he fought his way out, and he ran out of the house, down the path and out the front gate, where he ran into an old man. And all he could do was point up at the house where he'd come. And the old man said, "But what? Ah, that house has no one in it. It was the home of a samurai. He left his wife here and sent a message to her that he'd divorced her. And that broke her heart, and she died. And that was on the 9th day of the 10th moon, 20 years ago." My mama had died about 4 days before. She was giving birth to my baby sister, Anne. Her bed was red with the blood from the birthing. And my daddy, he stood there with his face leaned up against the wall, just making these little animal sounds. My baby brother, Bubba, he sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, and in his little baby voice, he was just saying, "Mama gone, Mama gone." My Aunt Suki was there. She cleaned up Mama. She cleaned up the baby. She put the baby on Mama's chest, and she whispered to her, "Remember." And I didn't cry. I didn't cry. We knew what we were supposed to do. My mom had vampire relatives, and we were supposed to stuff her mouth with garlic, and we were supposed to cut off her hands and her feet. But Daddy couldn't do it. Daddy was a preacher, a brimstone kind of preacher, and nobody would stand up to him. He said that Mom always hated garlic, that it would make her break out in a rash, and that she had the sweetest mouth and hands, and he just couldn't do it. He would allow that we could tie red ribbon around her wrists and around her ankles, and we hoped for the best. We put her in the ground. And that night, she rose up and she walked. She walked to our house, probably the dearest place she knew, and everyone else was asleep and I was there. And I saw her. She was Mama, but she didn't look like Mama. She was gray and her hair was dirty and her eyes were just dark, like shrouded eyes and dead eyes. And I was on the other side of the glass, and I said to her, "Mama, be gone." And she turned her head, and she didn't recognize me. I was her favorite, and she couldn't recognize me. I had put garlic all over the windows and around the door, and she put her hand up and touched the window, and I could see her gray hand turn a kind of like splotchy pink in the places where she touched, and that would have been the garlic. She tried all the windows, and I could hear her scratching at the door, but she couldn't get in. And I just stayed there listening. It went on a long time, her coming around the house. And I finally fell asleep on the inside by the door. Daddy was the first one up in the morning, and he found me, woke me up, but I never talked about it with him. I didn't tell him what had happened. But later we heard that little Joshua Greeno, baby, he'd been found dead in his crib. It took the doctor 2 days to get to him, just to pronounce him dead. We were that deep in the hills. Everybody knew. Of course, everyone knew. Even the doctor knew, and he was a city man. And so the Greenows and some other men from the town, they came and they talked to Daddy, and he understood. He said that he was the one responsible for turning her into a night walker, and so he was going to take responsibility for staking her out. So we made a plan that we would go to the Greenhouse house, and Daddy would take care of Mama during that night. And I stayed back with him just to help with the garlic, and I did all the windows, and he said, "Don't do the door," because there had to be a place where she'd be able to get in. And they went and they found some green branches, and they whittled them down to make the stakes, and they left them with Daddy. And I had stayed and strung some garlic for Daddy and for me. I had 3 strands of garlic on my neck, and I had the cross that Mama had given me when I was born. And I left Daddy with a kiss. And I started walking towards the greenhouse, but I stopped at the graveyard. And I went to where Mama was. And it was just a pile of dirt. There was no gravestone. There wasn't a cross or anything yet. That wouldn't happen for another year. And I just got down and I lay face down in that dirt. I spread my arms out and I just talked to her and said, "Mama, you gotta go. You have to leave us now. You have to rest. You have to sleep." And I started to sing to her songs she used to sing to me. And then she sang it to Bubba. And she would have sung it to Baby Ann if she'd lived. Black satin days, dapples and grays, all the pretty little horses. While I was lying there, I started remembering Daddy one time at a prayer meeting. He was just roaring about a horse whose name was Death, and the rest of the song just kind of stuck in my throat, and I rolled over and I just laid on that pile of dirt and looked up at the sky, and I fell asleep. I woke up and it was dead of night, and I could see the stars in the sky, I could see the moon, and straight ahead there were 2 hills, and the moon was just coming up in between those 2 hills, and so was Mama. I could feel the earth moving underneath me, and I could feel her nails scrabbling at my back, and I jumped up wide awake, and I looked down, and I think she would have come right up, but she was slow coming. Maybe me being there with the garlic and the cross and all, but I could see her arms come up, and then her head, and she didn't have the blonde hair like she used to. Her hair was gray, her skin was gray, her eyes were black, she was dirty. The winding sheet that she was buried with, it was all dirty and tattered from walking the hills the night before. She came to me, but it was like she couldn't see me. She could just sense me. She could sense that I was there, you know, a warm presence with blood coursing through my body. She didn't come too close. I think it was the garlic that was holding her back. And I started talking to her. Mama, is that you? Is that you, Mama? I started to remind her of things. I talked about, you know, the time she made me a cake for my birthday. I talked about how Suki always used to hum while she was baking bread. And I reminded her of that time that we were picking blueberries and Bubba went tumbling down the hill. And I looked for something, but her eyes, they were just black, but she stayed there. She stayed there close to me, and she reached out to touch me, but then she pulled back. And I was afraid to even look at her, but I was also afraid to stop talking. And I just kept reminding her about how Daddy used to say prayers, and he used to say grace before we ate every meal. And I reminded her of the time that there had been that little lamb that we spent the night with, and she was feeding it from a bottle. And I swear she was listening. She was listening, but her face was just there was nothing. And I looked, I thought I saw a little reflection, maybe some light in her eyes, but it was just a reflection of the moon. And I talked to her about how that time there was a bluebird that had flown into a window and just knocked itself cold, and she picked it up and she held it in her hands. And Mama, you remember that. You remember how you brought life to that little bird. And you can't be bringing death to these hills, Mama. Daddy didn't do it. He didn't cut off your hands. He didn't cut off your feet because he loves you, and we need you to return that love. And I looked at her eyes and I thought it was the reflection of the stars in her eyes, but then there was a tear. There was a dark tear. The star was just rolling down her cheek. And I said, Mama, are you there? Are you really here, Mama, or are you gone? And I took off one of those strings of garlic, and I got closer to her, and I took off the next one, and I held my arms out, and I took off the last strand of garlic, and her arms came out towards me. And that gray woman who was my mama and who wasn't my mama, she just held me, and I felt her mouth on my head and on my cheek and on my neck. And I saw the sun coming up between those two hills in front of us. I said, Mama, are you there, Mama? Is it you? And I heard her voice say, here and gone, child, here and gone. And the sun shone full on her face, turning it as red as the red clay around us. And she was gone. And I looked down at that pile of dirt, hardly been disturbed at all. And there was nothing on it but her gold wedding band shining. And I got down, sat on that pile of dirt, and I sang her goodbye. Blacks and bays, dapples and grays. And from the earth beneath me, I heard her answer, all the pretty little horses. And I went home, and there I found Daddy, still standing there in the open door.